So first off, before we start, I want to build some context for my talk. Can you please raise your hand if you can name all three branches of US government? Cool. Take a look around, see whose hands are raised. No shame if they're not, no problem at all. But real quick, for those whose hands are not raised, I would be remiss if I don't take the opportunity to remind you all what the branches are real quick. Legislative, executive, judicial. Keep that in your mind. Anyway, back to the main point. If your hand was not raised, that is totally okay, because more than half of your civic peers across the nation cannot also name the three branches of government. Less than a quarter of your fellow Americans cannot name some of the basic rights that those three branches are meant to respect, such as freedom of religion. And so when you take a look at these stats, which are from the Annenberg Center of Public Policy, pundits across the political spectrum have argued that we are facing a problem in America of civic apathy. A problem where most Americans, pundits argue, do not care about politics. They're tapped out of politics, checked out of the political process, and just simply aren't involved in civics or government at all. In response to this, there's been a movement on both ends of the political aisle to call for a bringing back of civic education, bring back civics. They argue that back in the 1960s, amidst the Cold War, we focused too much on STEM. In the early 2000s, we focused too much on the No Child Left Behind Act and on reading scores and math scores, which left behind civics. We threw out the civic baby with educational bathwater. If you've heard the title of my talk, kind of where I'm going with this, or even know me as a person, you might assume I'm going to argue to you today why we should teach more civics and why I stand with or agree with the Bring Back Civic movement. I disagree with that, actually. I want instead to talk to you about why the movement might be flawed and how specifically to teach civics, what the difference is between teaching political language in civics and then political impact. Before I go there, however, I first off want to start by talking about why I care about civics. This is me when I was younger, maybe about 5 or 6 years old, in Kashmir. I was very lucky growing up. I did not need a classroom to teach me that government matters. I learned it right here at home. My parents are in the audience, and I come from a refugee family in Kashmir. Some of you may have heard of Kashmir. I was on the news back in spring. It is a highly geostrategic region in between India, Pakistan, and China. It's very controversial. There's been a lot of conflict over it. And so my dad grew up there in a refugee village, in this village, when he was little. You might see a road in the back. There were no roads when he was there. When he was there growing up with his refugee family, there was no roads, no running water, no electricity. It might have been a stereotypical refugee family you see on the news. And he learned very quickly the impact government has on people. The reason his family was in that situation was because government failed to maintain stability. At the same time, however, government saved his, and by extension, my life. Recently, if you follow the news, you might have seen there have been discussions regarding foreign aid, how America's role in the world, and how we fund humanitarian projects. Those are not thought experiments or ideological endeavors for my dad. If he lifts up his shirt, he's here in the audience right now, you might catch him at intermission, he has 2 marks on his arms. Those are scars from vaccines administered to him by the World Health Organization. His village, he, and by extension myself, would not be alive if it were not for the impact of government. So I did not need to be taught that government made a difference in people's lives. Kashmir, a lot of the fighting is very controversial. A lot of it has to have, in the past, has historically been over the land. I like to say, I never inherited that land, but I got something much better. I inherited a sense of civic engagement. I chased that inheritance as I got older. Here's a picture of me back in 2021 in 7th grade during the pandemic. There's my mother, there's Senator Andy Kim, and there is me with long hair, for some reason, pale green Crocs and a mask. That picture's abounding in the hallways. There's an embarrassing picture of senior photos. I'm on there, unfortunately. And I show this picture not just to embarrass my parents, but also to show that throughout all the phases of my life, and my parents are very grateful this was a phase, civics has always mattered to me. Because no matter what's been going on in my life, I've been fortunate enough to understand that civics and government actually tangibly makes a difference in how people live. So after the pandemic, this was the gubernatorial race back in 2021 for the governor's office. As I got older, I worked on more campaigns. Standing here now as a senior, I worked on campaigns at all 5 major levels: municipal, county, congressional, statewide, and presidential. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to have conversations, knock on the doors of, called the numbers of, thousands of Americans across the country. I know that endears me to probably none of you, because I'm the kind of guy who's been bothering you for the past 2 years to vote. I apologize on behalf of the canvassing community, but I've been very fortunate to have those thousands of conversations, not just in the state, but from coast to coast. And what I've heard consistently is people tell me, we don't care about politics. We're not political people. At best, people will tell me the folks who are political hobbyists are just like coin collectors, they have a weird passion. At worst, we're downright irritants. At least that's what they would tell me. In the next breath, I would hear, everyone cares about political issues. I am yet to meet a single person who didn't have something to say about utility rates, about their mortgage or their rent, or about the cost of groceries. I have met very few parents who didn't care about the school district, what's going on with their kids. And I've talked to a plethora of college students across the country, and I've consistently heard student after student explain to me that they are worried what's going to happen to them in the job market once they graduate. These are all political issues. So I began to wonder, do we really have a problem of civic apathy, or do you have a problem where we treat political language and political impact as two different things? If you don't know what the distinction between those two things are yet, that's fine. Neither did I at this point. I've carried on, and it took me until this year to really figure out the difference between political language and political impact. Some of you may know we had a governor's race here in Jersey. The results actually came out on Tuesday, very recently. I worked in that race. I did ads. I found out just last night, 8:26 p.m. actually, very recently, that one of the ads I did grossed over 1.5 million views online. I was ecstatic. I celebrated with my family, but I was a little confused for two reasons. Firstly, I wasn't sure how I was going to fit that in this talk so quickly overnight. And secondly, I was confused because that ad I didn't think it was very impressive. I did other ads. I thought they would do much better. The ad I did that grossed 1.5 million views was on gun violence. And that's no doubt an important issue, but gun violence does not typically rank as one of the most important issues for Americans or even New Jerseyans. That typically goes to economic issues like home ownership, grocery rates, or of course, overall affordability. So number one, the issue itself wasn't super touching to most voters. And then number two, I just didn't think it was a good ad. I didn't think I was articulate. I didn't think I was eloquent. I didn't have pithy one-liners. I didn't even know I was going to be speaking about gun violence. I showed up at the end. I asked the ad directors, anything else you want me to talk about? And they said, try gun violence, you're a kid. And I went ahead and did it. So I watched those ads again last night, all the ones I did, because that ad didn't stand out just for my own, but it was the highest of the entire agencies. I watched all the ads, and I wondered, why would this ad in particular did it do so well? Could it have been chance from the algorithm? Looking back, I think it makes perfect sense. That was the only ad I did where I talked about political impact and not political language. I did not talk about the opposing candidate. I did not talk about the opposing party. I didn't talk about who historically occupies the White House, the governor's seat, complex government programs. I just talked about the issue of gun violence and how it weighs on my mind as a student. And it clearly did numbers. I can't say that it resonated with 1.5 million people, but I can say it resonated with enough people that the algorithm blew it up so that 1.5 million people in a 9 million person state saw it. And so for me, I began to internalize the difference between political language and political impact, as political language is the kind of stuff that does matter. No doubt it is important, but it is confusing and it's hard for people to see why it matters. An example I might think of is the filibuster. Quick show of hands, who knows what the filibuster is? This is a very civically educated room. I'm impressed. For those of you who don't know, no worries at all. The filibuster is a procedure used in the Senate that holds up bills. You can basically think of it that way. And long story short, it holds up a lot of legislation. To get rid of it, to override it, you require a 3/5 supermajority in the Senate. To get rid of it entirely, at the same time, a simple majority could be passed by the majority party to change the bylaws of the Senate and eliminate the filibuster. If all that sounds like straight yap, that's totally acceptable because it makes sense. That kind of education explaining to people is not going to resonate with them. But instead, talking about the legislation that gets held up by the filibuster and how people go hungry and how people cannot afford their home or their groceries, that kind of stuff does resonate with people. And so this isn't just about reaching more voters. I know people look at me like, great, now the canvassers have another way to steal more of our time. This has to do with connection, and everything with connection has to do with education. And so this is a picture of me in biology last year doing a lab. I didn't get a great grade on this lab, but I included the picture anyway. And so we've long known in pedagogy, that how we teach matters as much as what we teach. That's not a very novel idea. It's fairly intuitive. If you teach something in a way that teaches students why what they're learning matters, students, you would assume, are more likely to want to internalize information and study it and remember it. Thankfully, we don't have to rely on intuition alone. There are plenty of studies to back this up. Most recently, one done a few years ago, took 600 biology students in college, divided them randomly in groups of two, assigned one half of the students, one group, to write small essays after each class about how the biology content impacted their lives. The other half just simply summarized what they wrote. There's long been an association found between writing things down and remembering them. So to prevent that bias, because one group was writing things down, both groups wrote something down. But even with that bias, just looking at the impact of talking about how personal relevance, the results were staggering. In the short term, the students who wrote about personal relevance had better grades. And that's always a great plus. My parents were up front and talking about good grades. They're very excited. The kids had better grades, number one. Number two, they were also more likely to continue taking biology in the second semester. More interestingly, in the future, those students in that introductory biology course, seeing the relevance of biology on their lives, were more likely to pursue STEM career paths in the future. And so for a course as ubiquitous as biology, if we're talking about teaching with personal impact and relevance, and that is a productive and effective way to teach, why should civics be any different, especially since civics gets less time than biology in the classroom? So that's not a rhetorical question. We actually tried that out here at MFS. Something called Civics Week, which is a mini curriculum I originally designed last year with the help of my school's history department here at MFS. And so we taught 3 lessons: gerrymandering, local government, campaign finance, and all under the banner of student teaching. So students who would make arguments or read articles and then teach them to their peers, kind of democratizing the teaching of democracy. And I'm going to show you examples of what they made in a little bit. I want to first show you, I had to take out some pictures for copyright issues, but an example of how we taught gerrymandering. Now the question, can we raise our hands if we know what gerrymandering is? Cool, awesome. So in case you don't know, gerrymandering is a little difficult to explain, briefly at least. Basically, we have congressional representatives. Each state, depending on how many people are in the state, gets a certain amount of congressional representatives. States can kind of draw up and divvy up their districts within their state to make sure that one party gets more representatives than the other. So basically think of it, one party is like stealing representatives. So instead of teaching gerrymandering to kids as, oh, this helps Democrats or Republicans, this means the blue team is winning, or the red team is winning, or this team is bigger, we taught it through the lens of what happens to a district when they lose an advocate? What happens to a district when they lose a congressperson? We talked through the lens of across the country, across political parties, South Carolina, Alabama, Illinois, and Arizona, so geographically diverse as well. And we give examples of what happens to communities when the representatives are gerrymandered out of a district, and how hospitals shut down, libraries, which many students here at MFS use, the local library just down the street, shut down, and how potholes can't get fixed, directly tying that, what we hear about gerrymandering, this big issue that might be hard to understand, to local impact. We also talked about local government as a whole. We took students and asked them before the lesson, can you name problems in your community? Very easy question. We heard things ranging from climate change all the way down to basic things like my library doesn't open late and I want to study longer. We then put them in the role of a county commissioner using an exercise from the National Association of American Counties. And after the game, after putting themselves in the role of someone in local government, they then tackle those problems again. And so I'm really curious to see now, since I've asked a bunch of questions about federal civics and we seem to be fairly knowledgeable, how many people here knows what a county clerk even does? Please raise your hand. Yeah, a lot less people. And so that seems to be a real problem, because when we're talking about civics, civics isn't just the federal government. What happens in Washington affects you a lot less than what happens just down the street with town hall, especially those of you who live here in Moorestown talking about property taxes or school system, all those things that affect your day-to-day. And so we focused on teaching kids local government, not just the memorizing, well, this is what the county clerk does, this is what your congressperson does, but telling them this is what they can do for you. Because the way we teach civics right now is almost as if it's a foreign language with so many rules and principles to understand. It's almost like you're learning Chinese. And I say that as someone who tried to take Chinese. If anything, perhaps sometimes Chinese can be easier. And instead, if we taught civics as something how it affects people, it's much easier to internalize. Here's an example, not a word added from myself or any other teacher, of what kids had to write about campaign finance. This is directly pulled from the kids' slides about what would happen if we had shorter election cycles, with kids arguing about what would happen if we changed the political process in America. And I actually really like this slide, which talks, another example, about fully publicly funded campaign cycles. You don't have to know what that means. All you have to do is read that second passage talking about how changing the campaign finance system would give opportunity to people who don't have personal wealth or connections. And the kids presented these slides to their peers, and they explained how changing the campaign finance system would allow folks from marginalized communities to enter into government. And a lot of students could see how that impacted themselves, members of those own communities, young kids from those own communities, and how that can make a difference in our political system. Otherwise, the system of campaign finance is very pitnicky. Yeah, even myself personally, I struggle to communicate and convey and understand how everything works. If we're not talking about how it directly impacts people, it's very easy to get lost in the sauce. And so it's very hard to kind of give a metric for how successful an educational project is, because you can't quantify that. But as a testament to how successful this method of teaching civics through impact is, I'd like to turn to a quote I asked a teacher, Winnie Davidson, who used to teach here and help me with this project, had. She called it the coolest project I've ever seen in my 20 years of teaching. We've expanded it this year, not just to me, but for younger kids, including Zara, who just gave me an introduction, and who I taught last year, teaching it forward here at MFS. We've also expanded to Moorestown Public School at WAMS and neighboring schools. So I personally believe, I know it's hard to quantify a metric to an audience when we're talking about information retention, but its growth speaks for itself. And so I know it's when we talk about bringing back civic education, it feels like that's not really important because there's so many other issues we need to have in the world. And at the same time, on the flip side, some people think, well, we need to be talking constantly about civics. If you're someone who's very politically inclined, taking a look at how many hands were raised, I think many of you might be, well, we need to be talking constantly about the three branches of government, about the filibuster, about the control of Congress. But that's not how we teach most subjects, actually. We need engineers, scientists, mathematicians, authors, all these sorts of people. But we don't teach introductory courses to math, physics, biology, or English at the highest level. We don't teach them at the professional level with professional complexity. We instead teach them at an introductory level and try to teach people as early as possible, kids, why this matters to you. When we teach kids addition and subtraction back in lower school, we don't teach them through the lens of, well, what happens if you take the derivative of the water leaving the cylinder? We teach them, well, if Johnny has 5 apples and you have 4, and you add them together, how many apples do you have? And that's how we teach math. Why don't we do the same for civics? And so one thing I would say to the Bring Back Civics movement is very clear. We don't need to look back in the past for how civics used to work. If we're looking back to bring back civics how it used to be, we wouldn't be where we are today. There would be enough civically engaged citizens to stop the gutting of civic education in school boards across the country. There would be enough civic citizens to be representative in that poll who went through the system and to tell us, I know the 3 branches of government. Instead, we need to look forward to a new future of civics, one that doesn't just focus on the 3 branches of government that are far away, but on the actual basics of civics, as our founding fathers actually intended, which is our own Main Street. Thank you.